So we'll go to week 5, and we'll take a look at Wednesday, which was yesterday. What should you have been working on? Hopefully yesterday you were able to finish and submit your Unit 3 vocab on respiration. And then maybe hopefully you were watching some of the lecture videos that I have prepared on my YouTube video. Remember, those are those videos where they say like watch 2.5, 2.6. They can be found under Unit 3, and you just scroll down until you see the lectures, right? And they're all numbered, 3.1 all the way through 3.7, okay? So hopefully you had a chance to at least watch over the last couple days 3, 4, 4, 5, and 6. And I'm going to go over some of that today in class. So let's see what we got to do today, okay? We need to finish working on our PowerPoint, our lecture videos, and our notes, right? So your Unit 3 notes are due this Friday. This is 9/18. That was last semester. Let's see, what is the date on Friday the 5th? Okay, so your notes are due Friday the 5th, which is tomorrow. Now remember, they're not due until midnight tomorrow, but don't wait until the last minute. I'm going to talk to you guys where it says warm-up questions. I'm just going to kind of go over respiration. I'm going to talk about the differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Remember, respiration is the way our cells break down food for energy, and it can be done 2 ways, and I'm going to talk to you guys about that. And then today you've got this really, I think this video is funny. I think it's cool. It's a video about fermented foods, and you can find this video under Unit 3, right? Here we go, video respiration. If you click on this, looks like some of you guys have already finished it and turned it in. That's great. You've got a link right here, you know, how we figured out fermentation. Here's the video link. You know, you copy and paste this into your browser, and there's a couple short questions, right? These questions should not take you long. I think the video is like 10 minutes. It's pretty neat because it talks about the kind of the evolution of our relationship with alcohol, right? Because alcohol is something that is produced through fermentation. Cheese is through fermentation. Bread, believe it or not, is a product of fermentation. Yogurt, soy sauce, kimchi, sauerkraut, all of these wonderful foods are the product of a type of fermentation. So that video will go over that, and I'll talk a little bit about the video tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'll do a little quiz review. I'll go over everything, and then you guys will take your quiz on respiration. And then hopefully you'll be done with your notes for Unit 3. So let me go ahead and talk to you guys a little bit about respiration, right? Again, this does not take the place of those lecture videos, right? Because I just don't even have the time right now to go over everything that was covered in those 3 videos, okay? And remember, those videos can be watched at your speed as well. So you can kind of speed or slow it down. Let me put this up here. And so today we're talking about respiration. And remember, this is not breathing. I mean, it's why we need to breathe so that we can get air for our cells to do respiration. But this is the gas exchange that our cells participate in to be able to get energy out of food. And there are 2 main types, okay? And we talked a little bit about this earlier this week, right? If we have oxygen, right? So if our cells have plenty of oxygen, that's the chemical formula for molecular oxygen. This is kind of how oxygen exists in the air around your head. Our cells will perform aerobic respiration, okay? Aerobic respiration. Just think air, aeroplane, right? That's an old school name for an airplane, right? Now, sometimes our cells need to be able to perform if we don't have enough oxygen, right? And so that, let me get a different color. You know, so this would be no oxygen. We call this anaerobic respiration, which means no air, right? We can use these terms to describe exercise as well. Running, swimming, climbing, bikes, cycling, right? They all need lots of air, right? That's aerobic exercise. Stretching, bench press, like lifting weights, yoga, those are all anaerobic because you're not breathing heavily, right? Those are anaerobic exercises. Now, we talked a lot about aerobic respiration, right? We talked about the equation, right? Your cells need oxygen to break down glucose, right? C6H12 O6. And then our cells can produce wastewater, which we either urinate, defecate, or exhale out. We produce a waste gas known as carbon dioxide. Every time you exhale, you release carbon dioxide, and believe it or not, you're actually losing weight every time you exhale. That's why we can use aerobic respiration to lose weight. And ATP, and remember, ATP is like a little energy molecule, right? So aerobic respiration lets us get energy out of our food. Now, the one thing you need to know about aerobic respiration is it produces lots of ATP, lots of energy, okay? So if I put two students on a treadmill, and for one student, right, I give them an oxygen mask that they have pure oxygen. And I say, okay, I want you guys to run the treadmill, see who can run the farthest, right? Well, the student who has the oxygen mask, who has access to pure oxygen, is going to be able to produce more energy, because the more air you have, the more energy your body can produce. And that's why when you hold your breath, sometimes you start to feel tired afterwards. Or if you hold your breath or you're out of breath and you stand up too quickly, sometimes you might collapse, right? Because your body doesn't have enough energy. This is also why in a lot of casinos, they actually pump oxygen into the casino room, because they want you to have lots of energy so you can spend all your money, okay? And this takes place, aerobic respiration takes place in a special organelle, the powerhouse of the cell, the mighty mitochondria. Okay, it's a tiny little organelle. And all organisms that have a mitochondria can perform aerobic respiration. Animals, plants, algae, yeast, fungi, all of those organisms have mitochondria, so they can break down glucose with oxygen to make energy. Now let's talk about the other one, right? Let's talk about anaerobic. Anaerobic's a little different. So anaerobic is what our bodies do when we have no oxygen, right? And there is another name for anaerobic respiration, and it's fermentation. And you might be thinking, what the heck, Mr. Collins? You just said that sometimes our bodies need to use anaerobic respiration. Does that mean that fermentation is happening inside of our bodies? Yes, it is. However, not the same type of fermentation that I think you're thinking about. Because when you hear the word fermentation, most of you guys are probably thinking about booze, right? You're thinking like, beer, wine, and that is alcohol that is produced through fermentation. Or you think about like fruit that you might have left in your trunk of your car, in your backpack, or, it just gets nasty. It's fermenting, right? And you're just like, oh my God, it's like rotting, right? Well, that is not the same type of fermentation that happens inside of our bodies, okay? So there's two types of anaerobic fermentation. There's two types of anaerobic respiration. And the first one, I'll do in blue. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Here we go. The first one is called alcoholic fermentation. And I bet you can guess what alcoholic fermentation produces. So some organisms, if they do not have enough oxygen, maybe they're in an environment where there's no oxygen, they will try to get energy out of their food through a process, a metabolic reaction known as alcoholic fermentation. And what does alcoholic fermentation produce? It produces alcohol. And the scientific name for alcohol, and the kind of alcohol that is generally produced by fermentation, is known as ethanol, right? So this is what you find in beer and wine. Beer and wine are both beverages that are made by alcoholic fermentation. Now, it also produces carbon dioxide, right? Now, what's really neat about this is alcoholic fermentation is something that that yeast are really good at, right? Yeast are really good at alcoholic fermentation. So when you want to make beer, you use the same ingredients that you would more or less if you were making bread, right? You need some kind of sugar, some kind of starch, you need water, and you need yeast, right? So you mix the ingredients together, right? The grains, maybe like wheat or rye, right? Barley. You take those grains, which are really starchy plants, and you grind them up into a powder, right? Your flour, and then you mix it with some water and you add your yeast. Well, your yeast are living things. And so you mix it into the dough at a nice warm temperature. And then generally you want to make sure to get all the air out of your dough. right? Because you want the yeast that are now trapped in the dough to perform alcoholic fermentation. So you knead the dough, you get the oxygen out, and you leave it on a warm counter, right? Maybe in your kitchen. And a couple hours later, you notice the bread starts to rise a little bit. Well, the reason the bread is rising and expanding is because the yeast that are trapped inside of the bread are actually eating the flour. And since they don't have access to air because you squished it all out, they're using alcoholic fermentation. So as they break the sugars down in an anaerobic environment with no oxygen, they produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is a gas. And the carbon dioxide is a gas and it wants to escape. And so it slowly starts to expand. That's what causes the dough to rise. Now, ethanol, alcohol, when it's warm, it turns to a gas pretty easily. And so as it turns into a gas, it is also making the bread rise. Now, usually when you make bread, and as the bread's rising, you can tell it has a very distinct smell, right? It's a good smell. It's like but it's stinky, right? You can definitely smell it in the kitchen. When your bread dough rises, then you put it in the oven and you bake it, right? Now, the reason that we bake it is we want to kill the yeast because the yeast are still in the bread. And we want all the alcohol to evaporate, right? And we want to get a nice crust. Now, when you take your bread out of the oven and you cut it open, you might notice the bread looks spongy on the inside. Well, it looks spongy like that because those little openings are where gases were expanding. And then when you bake bread in the oven, your kitchen smells beautiful, right? And the smell spreads through your house. That's actually alcohol. Now, if you didn't cook your bread all the way, you didn't bake it long enough and you took it out and you cut it open and you start to eat it, it might taste kind of boozy, right? Or it's going to taste kind of like alcohol or smell like alcohol. It doesn't mean that you're going to eat that loaf of bread and get drunk, right? There's clearly not enough alcohol left in the bread, but some of it's still left in there, and that's why you can taste it. Now, some bread recipes might actually require some of the alcohol to linger behind, but nobody's eating bread and getting intoxicated. If you want to make beer, it's the same thing more or less, right? You take your grains, like barley, right? And then you mix it with water, you mix it with yeast. But this time, instead of like kneading out the dough and leaving it on the counter, we're actually going to mix it all in a barrel and we're going to seal it airtight. And we're going to let it sit there. And the yeast floating around in this container, they're full of water and full of grain. Grains are starchy, right? Big polysaccharide sugars. The yeast is going to start breaking it down. Eventually it runs out of oxygen because the barrel or the container is closed. And then they use alcoholic fermentation. This time though, the carbon dioxide has nowhere to go and the alcohol has nowhere to go, right? So it stays in the solution. Now, maybe after a couple weeks, you go and you pry open that container, you open that barrel, and you hear that sound. That's carbon dioxide gas escaping. And you might be like, whoa, okay, that's done, right? Because you'll smell the alcohol trying to evaporate. Grapes, to make wine, same thing. Grapes are fruit, and you can make wine out of any kind of fruit because on the skin of the fruit are lots of microbes, little bacteria and little yeast, right? So you mash up the grapes, you mix it with some water, and you put it in a barrel, and you seal it. The little microorganisms, they panic because they're trapped in this barrel, and they use alcoholic fermentation, right? But it's a little different. Making wine requires different ingredients and different microbes, so the end product is different. But at the end of the day, it's still anaerobic fermentation. Now, thankfully for us, our cells don't use alcoholic fermentation. Otherwise, every time you went to go play basketball or you went for a run or you were exercising, you would get drunk. And that wouldn't work out very well, right? Because think about our evolutionary history. 50,000 years ago, if we were walking around on the African savannah and a lion popped up out of the woods and scared us, we all took off running. Sorry. If our cells used alcoholic fermentation, you'd be running and you'd get drunker and drunker and drunker and eventually just lay down and be like, whatever, I don't care, the lion eats me, right? Our cells use something different. Our cells, let me use, hold on. Our cells use something known as lactic acid fermentation. So in our bodies, especially our muscles, right? So in animal muscles, when we are working out really hard or we are running really fast, if we can't breathe, you might notice that your muscles really, really start to burn. And eventually they can kind of like shut down on you. And that's because your muscle cells are using lactic acid fermentation or lactic acid anaerobic respiration. So it's a type of respiration that happens when we run out of oxygen. And the problem with this is it produces, well, lactic acid. And lactic acid is one of the things that makes your muscles burn or ache while you exercise. Okay? And eventually, your body can make so much lactic acid that the pH becomes too acidic and your muscles just kind of shut down, right? Now, our bodies have neat adaptations, right? So like the first time you do an exercise, you might wake up the next day and be really sore. And then a week later, you do the same exercise and you're a little bit less sore. And that's because our bodies just get more efficient at performing both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Generally, when we're running, we want to try to stay out of this anaerobic respiration because once this starts, once lactic acid fermentation starts, we don't have much time left before our bodies are like, nope, we have to stop. We can't, go hard in the paint anymore during a basketball game. Now, there is a problem with both of these things. Both alcoholic and lactic acid respiration, they produce a very small amount of ATP. So they don't really give cells or organism lots of energy, right? This is like oh crap, right? This is life's backup plan, right? Our muscles don't want to do this, right? Because once this starts, we're going to run out of energy because lactic acid fermentation cannot produce enough energy. It cannot produce enough ATP. Yeast don't want to do this either, right? Yeast would much prefer to use aerobic respiration and make lots of energy, lots of ATP. And that's why when we put them into the barrel, into the container to make beer and wine, they desperately try to survive using alcoholic fermentation. They don't want to do that. Very few living things actually enjoy ethanol, right? Alcohol is a poison. It's toxic. And believe it or not, the ethanol that is produced by the yeast in alcoholic fermentation will eventually actually kill the yeast, right? And that's why beer and wine only get so strong, right? It doesn't matter how long you leave it. Eventually, the alcohol, there's so much alcohol that it kills all the yeast, and the yeast are dead. So obviously, you have nothing else to produce the alcohol there. Living things don't want to do this. Now, there are some bacteria out there that have special microbes and special metabolic pathways to break down ethanol for energy. But most living things, this thing is very poisonous, right? Especially to people, right? That's why we call it, if someone isn't drunk, they're intoxicated because they have ingested a toxin. And that's why if they ingest too much of it, they can die, right? Or if somebody drinks every day, they're slowly poisoning their body over a long period of time. And alcoholics don't have a lot of energy. They're always tired all the time, right? And that's because alcohol and alcoholic fermentation and all that, it does not produce very much energy at all, okay? All right. Now, what I would like for you guys to do, let me exit out of this, is what I would like for you to do now is I'd like for you to go here, click on this, and I want you to watch this video about fermentation, about fermented foods and fermented beverages. And I'd like for you to spend the next 20 minutes watching the video and answering the questions. If you have any problems or if you have any questions while working on this, please don't hesitate to send me an email. And one thing I want you guys to realize, if you haven't already, is if you find these videos challenging, you can always speed them up or slow them down, right? I try to choose a lot of videos. I try to use a lot of videos that actually have closed captioning. So if you find it easier to read, you can do it like that. And if English is your second language, all right, you can always click on these three dots, open the transcript, and then you're going to get, like a typed version of what the person is saying, right? So we skip the ad, and everything this person is saying is going to be written over here. So you can actually copy this into a translator, or you can simply click here, and some videos will actually have like Spanish or something else, but that's entirely up to you. All right, well, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. It's really nice outside, it's a little chilly. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.